Thank you. We're trying. Everything gets
Yes, you're succeeding so far.
Yeah.
صباح الخير جميعا. Good morning everyone. If we can please close the doors here and here. بعد إذن حضراتكم. Yes. If we can please close the door here and here. وبعد إذن حضراتكم السادة المصورين, if you can take the photos من ورا من فضلكم so people can follow. حاضر. من فضل حضرتك ممكن نقفل الباب اللي بره من فضلك عشان نحاول نحسن الصوت. حاضر. حاضر. تمام. Good morning everyone. My name is Karim Refat. I am the chairman of Engage Group. We are a public policy and government affairs agency. I would like to start by welcoming you all to being with us today on a very important day, and I would like to start by thanking Mr. Okesha, the chairman of the National Bank of Egypt, for allowing me the opportunity to be with you all today and to moderate this panel. Very quick 2 words. I think today is a great day. I think it's one of the most important days in COP. We are at Energy Day. We are expecting a lot of announcements, a lot of good projects, and it's a greater day for me because I am really honored for the first time to be moderating a panel to host Her Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fouad, the Minister of Environment and Sustainable Development from Egypt. We're expecting a very deep discussion, but before we go on to this deep discussion, I think we want to start with the engine behind COP27 in Egypt, with the real woman, and I'm very proud to say that, who was behind our efforts to host this magnificent conference, and to welcome on stage Dr. Yasmin Fouad, Minister of Environment from the Arab Republic of Egypt.
Good morning, everyone. A good day and a wonderful day to all. An energy day that would be full of energy all around the pavilions and the walls of the COP27. At the outset, I would like to thank my brother, Mr. Hisham Okesha, for inviting me to that panel, not because the NBE has a key role to play as a national bank here in Egypt, but because they have been aside the government hand in hand along the journey of the depollution. It's not climate or biodiversity that they have been supporting, but they are the oldest bank that had believed in supporting the private sector in order to comply with the environment regulation. That was 1997, 1999, something like that. Before we ever discussed climate finance, before we ever discussed the issue of the banking sector and its role in the climate emissions. So our thanks would also go to him in that regard. But let me give a quick overview of the climate finance architecture at the national level in Egypt and how we're moving from one step to the other. We had a number of local banks and national banks that started working on the depollution projects, which is mainly focuses on some areas like treated wastewater to stop the discharge in the River Nile, or energy efficiency or alternative fuels. And the last two would go in the formula and the equation of the greenhouse gases reduction if we turn the other side of the coin. And that started by a credit line with a very low interest rate, where the MDBs would come and provide that finance. And the role of the bank is to provide the part related to that credit line, ensure the visibility of the project, and the role of the ministry is to provide the technical assistance where all aspects of the environment would be integrated. We went into that journey 15 years, something like that, and we had mobilized a huge amount of millions that would exceed the $600 million over that period of time to support the industries in Egypt and how best they can depollute, abide with the regulations of the environment. So that is a story. But now, as we are embarking on a new era where we need to abide with what's happening in the world around us, 3 years ago, even before we thought that we would submit our paper to host the COP, we started a new national climate financing system in Egypt. And that was supported by the Green Climate Fund and the AFD. And the idea of that is to help the national banks to understand the difference between climate finance and ODA. Number one, how best they can assess what kind of the de-risking tool that they can work on the financial part, and what kind of projects that they would work on. Definitely the energy projects were one of the biggest one, and that is more bankable and easy to pitch in. And that is the role that the National Bank of Egypt, together with the Central Bank of Egypt, is currently doing. But for COP27, when we're talking about the COP for implementation, when we're talking about huge climate crisis that's happening worldwide, when we're talking about Egypt as being one of the most vulnerable countries to the impact of climate change, and the Nile Delta is one of the most 3 hotspots worldwide, we are looking further on how best to include adaptation within the national banks. A very good example of that, which I'll end my statement with, is the energy sector. We understand that the energy is bankable. We started working on that. Credit lines flow from our MDBs into that process, and we know how to de-risk that. But what about adaptation? And even at the negotiations level, we're still trying to define the global goal on adaptation. And that's a formal climate change process that we need to respect. So one thing that this country has done is that we developed our strategy, a national strategy with the vision and objectives, which, by the way, is not a requirement within the Paris Agreement. But we've done that up till 2050 to have a comprehensive and a holistic vision that gather us all, whether the government, the banking sector, the civil society, and the academic. And within the climate strategy, we have a whole component that looks at the architecture of the climate finance in Egypt and the role of the bank. And then we went into to dig into our NDC with a very ambitious target of the 42% of the renewable by 2035. And during our application of the NOAFI with our colleagues from the EBRD, US, and Germany, we were more ambitious before the COP by 2 days, that we said we're reaching the 42% 2030 and not 2035 as indicated in our NDC. And we started that program of the 10 by 10 gigawatt of replacement of the power plants working with the natural gas. But the basis for that, we're saying addition is not bankable. So let us take the renewable that we're working on and couple the food and water component into that. So the renewable that will be expanded will be used to expand agricultural lands, and the same renewable will be used for the water desalination. That's a beautiful kind of combination between a bankable mitigation intervention that would easy up and de-risk the adaptation part. It will help the private sector when they intervene, that they're sure that they're winning in one part. And let us have the MDBs to de-risk that part of the bankability of the adaptation part. And the food and water lies on the energy, which the 3 are the basic needs. So here, Egypt is providing a model of putting the human needs at the heart of the climate discussion in a year where there is a real energy and food crisis. That's our story, and I would like to thank the bank. We're always there. We'll continue on the climate finance architecture. By the first quarter of 2023, we will be finalizing our investment plan, turning our strategy. We've started the first phase into a full investment plan. Where are the gaps? What would be needed as an enabling environment? And where would be the quick wins? And where we would like to go up till 2050. Thank you very much.
Dr. Yasmin, thank you very, very much. And it's really honoring to see how we are really committed, all of us, together for implementation. You really said it all. I really thank you very much. I would now like to open a discussion to a very rich discussion about financing climate change. Sorry? Yeah. So we have a video first, and then I'll welcome the panelists on the stage. We have like National Bank of Egypt always surprising us with a special video for COP27.
الاختراعات دي كلها غيرت حياتنا، بس في اختراع منهم كان بداية لكل حاجة وصلنا لها. أيوة دي، عشان اختراع اللمبة عمل ثورة شقلبت العالم كله. بزرار بقى عندك شمس بالليل، يعني يوم أطول، يعني شغل أكتر وتطور أسرع. نور يعني جهاز شغال، يعني حياة. اللمبة عملت ثورة في كل حاجة حوالينا، ووصلتنا لحاجات ما كناش نحلم بيها بسرعة الضوء، لحد ما حياتنا بقت بتلف حوالين اللمبة، وبقينا نضحي بأي حاجة عشان تفضل منورة. ضحينا بالأرض اللي بناكل منها والشجر، لوثنا الهواء اللي بنتنفسه والمية اللي بنشربها. ضحينا بأغلى ما عندنا. طب لو قلت لك مش محتاج تضحي تاني، إن بقى في بديل ما بيخلصش، ما بيلوثش، بديل حوالينا في كل مكان. لو قلت لك إن طاقتنا بقت من نور الشمس وسرعة الهواء، وبلدنا النهارده في طريقها انها تبقى بتولد طاقه نظيفه بنسبه 42% من اجمالي طاقه مصر قبل سنه 2035. وعشان كده البنك الاهلي المصري دخل الطاقه النظيفه في استراتيجيته، وبيمول المشروعات المهتمه بالتغير المناخي والمشروعات الخضراء والطاقه المتجدده، وخلى الاستدامه واحده من اكبر اهتماماته، باعتماد حلول صديقه للبيئه زي توفير استهلاك الميه والكهرباء واستخدام الطاقه الشمسيه في عدد من الفروع، عشان هدفنا نبني مستقبل مستدام لاهل مصر. البنك الاهلي المصري، بنك اهل مصر.
Thank you very much. بنك الأهلي المصري فعلا بنك أهل مصر always. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's very true. I'd like to now welcome on the panel our esteemed guests and speakers. Allow me to start, of course, with the host, Mr. Hisham Okasha, Chairman of National Bank of Egypt. Thank you for having us, and thank you for being with us. I would also like to welcome Her Excellency Dr. Amani Abu Zaid, Commissioner for the Infrastructure and Energy at the African Union. It's an extreme pleasure to have you with us, Efendim. And Dr. Hanan Morsi, Deputy Executive Secretary and Chief Economist at the UN Commission for Africa. Cassilde Brenière, COO, Agence Française de Développement. Plaisir de vous avoir. Thank you to be with us. Harry Board Carpenter, EBRD, Managing Director for Climate Strategy and Delivery. We will also be joined eventually later on. Thank you يا فندم جدا، نورتينا معالي الوزيرة. شكرا يا فندم. So I'll just give one moment for the room to be evacuated. So if you allow me, I think beyond the keynote speech from Her Excellency Minister Yasmin Fouad, I think let's get down to the real business. I think we're facing a very important topic, financing climate change. And I hope that when we say financing climate change, we're financing climate change in the positive direction, not in the negative direction. I think I would like to start with His Excellency Mr. Hussam Akasha, and I'll ask you the following very directly to go into the point. With all what, I'm not a banker, but with all what we read about the Basel rules, the Basel I, the Basel II, the key regulations and policy from the Central Bank of Egypt, looking at climate change as a risk, looking at the capacity of companies and borrowers to be able to understand how to work on the renewables, on green economy and green transition and so on. Is this helping, enabling National Bank of Egypt, Bank Al Masr to do more, or are you feeling we need to work more on policies and there are challenges and so on? How careful are you, because as a banker, you're always very careful, how careful are you on this subject? I think it's better to use the yes.
First of all, I'd like to welcome you all to the NBE panel. I mean, it's a real pleasure having you all and hosting you for this session. I'd also like to thank my fellow panelists for accepting the invitation and honoring us with their presence with us on this panel. Being the only banker on the panel is an advantage because I can tell you what we do and tell you, don't worry, banks have been around for 4,000 years, whether by bartering, whether by grain loans, whether in any form whatsoever. And as we are adapting to the climate, we're also being able to adapt within the banking sector to what's needed going forward. We've adapted towards extra payments. The transition that took place over the past 2 years with the COVID issues, that was the main game changer for the banking sector. When technology-wise, we enhanced our capabilities, we enhanced our delivery channels. Going digital is one of the main requirements of going towards a cleaner environment. When you look at the scale of lending and what the Central Bank of Egypt has contributed in the directives of July 2021 in requiring sustainability to be embedded within the policies, strategies, and procedures of the banking sector, that was crucial for changing the mindset of banks. As Her Excellency Minister of Environment was just mentioning, National Bank of Egypt and their role in environment and pollution abatement goes back to 1998, when we first started the first EPAB program. Followed by that was the second program, third, and now we're discussing going further within the new framework of financing pollution abatement. So that's a very important role that we take seriously. As a strategy, of course, as I mentioned, we're embedding within the policies, procedures, and a strategy of the bank all the requirements of the mitigation and mitigation for the environment, climate, finance issues. When you look at the amount of finance that's going to climate finance, it's crucial to identify that all what's being financed around the world is around $640 billion. That's in debt, in equity, and in donations. So that amount out there is minimal compared to the global debt market, which is in excess of $370 trillion. What's more alarming is that 75% of those 640 billion is targeted to Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America. Whereas the more countries, the needs for climate finance or to combat the negative repercussions of the climate issue is more in the Southern Hemisphere and in developing countries. This is where we need investment. And this is where there's more opportunity to have a bankable project. We have the land, we have the wind, we have the sun. I mean, when you look at projects National Bank of Egypt contributed in, solar panel projects, desalination projects, wind farms, that's on the larger scale. On the smaller scale, we've included smaller programs. We've always mentioned the importance of transition within our policy. We can't expect, there is a learning curve. We learned how to do stress testing, we learned how to deal with changing environments, we learned how to go to SMEs, go to women empowerment. All this is a learning curve that we need international agencies to help us by in the form of technical assistance and in the form of financial assistance. When you look at the smaller projects, when you look at the role of the transition within national Egypt, within we'll find that the lending programs included changing the taxis and buses towards natural gas. This is the first step towards transition into cleaner climate. We went into changing agriculture from traditional farming and traditional irrigation to solar-powered modern irrigation. That's also, and we're lending the farmers in collaboration with the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Irrigation, and Ministry of Agriculture. So all those kind of customer-based lending front, this is where we are. Even on the investment side, we're investing in one of the companies that's working with electric buses and electric cars. Also availing digital payments is very important for the environment. Internally, National Bank of Egypt has also adopted a lot of policies within its internal strategy, not only on reducing energy by having, as you saw in our advertisement, having solar panels on our new branches that are standalone branches, contributing to around 40% of the electrical consumption of those branches. Also, water-saving procedures have taken place, electricity as well, reducing our car fleet and moving more to the public transportation, underground, things like that. So all those things are internal measures. Putting the special glass, I'm not a technical person, so I don't know exactly what it is, but I understand that since 2008, our office buildings have had the special sheets to reduce the consumption of electricity within the branches. And since 2008, we've been adapting and increasing our internal procedures that we're undertaking to preserve that. So that's on the customer base and on the internal side. We also have our CSR, corporate social responsibility, together with our sponsorship plans. That's very important as well, because it's not just a matter of customers and business, but we also need to educate the community, educate our customers through, educate our staff. I mean, internally we have 100 champions, 100 ambassadors trained on the GRI reporting system, and they are the ambassadors of change within the bank. National Bank, when you talk about transition, the first step is to know where you are. And National Bank of Egypt took that very seriously. Back in 2020, with our first GRI report covering the period of 2017 to 2019. And this year we issued our second GRI report together with our environment impact report and our social impact report, which are also required in larger projects that we are lending. It's part of our role in educating our customers. If we're giving a big loan, then we need to see those social impact reports, those environmental impact reports when we're lending our customers. So on the CSR level, as I was discussed, there's a lot of collaboration, as Her Excellency the Minister just explained. We're together with the Egypt Climate Initiative for the shores and preserving the natural habitat together with the natural reserves of Egypt. Also, we're sponsoring certain projects with combating coral bleaching and having coral rehabilitation, as it were, in a project in Ghardaa, where we have a coral nursery that we are sponsoring its initiator. So as not to take too much of the time, and thanking again the panelists for being with us, this is the role of what National Bank of Egypt is doing, the transition, aiding our customers, taking them hand in hand, and hoping to have more support from our donors in the form of consultation, in the form of financing, because those projects have to be bankable. De-risking, changing those projects to become a bankable project is very important to have climate finance rewardable to both the banks and the investors themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Extremely elaborative, extremely rich, and very impressive as usual, National Bank of Egypt. I'll move on to Dr. Amani Abu Zaid, and allow me to tell Your Excellency, I don't think anyone envies you when we talk about financing climate change in Africa, because the challenge is that big between what is needed and what has been deployed. And my question to Your Excellency would be, is it the same gap across all sectors? Do we have enough harmony among policies of different regulators around Africa? Do we need to give more attention to mitigation in the current phase, or to continue fast-tracking adaptation and renewables and so on? I mean, sitting in your shoes when I thought about moderating, I think this is a very challenging seat to take, because today this is the Egyptian COP, but this is an Egyptian African COP, and everyone is expecting outcomes and announcements and recommendations of how are we going to move climate change into the right direction in Africa. So where do we start from? Do we start on policy? Do we start on choosing a sector? Do we start talking to regulators and for more harmony? How do we go about it?
Thank you for making my life even more complex than it's already is. Good morning, everyone. Allow me at the outset to thank the President, the government, the people of Egypt for hosting and welcoming this COP on behalf of Africa, and to do it this beautifully and brilliantly. Congratulations to everyone. We are really, really proud as Africans to be in this COP. The second thing I would like to say is that I would particularly like to thank the Chair Orkasha, for inviting me to this panel, and for his persistent team who kept making sure that I'm here. But I really wanted to be here. I wanted to be here because this is the COP of action. And no action is possible without everyone on board, without the private sector, without the financing arms, without the goodwill of the politicians and the experts of the environmentalists. So that is more of a reason for me to be here. And as I've been on a panel of international banks, at the least, and my duty would also be to be on the panel of the Ahli Bank, one of the pillars of banking in Africa, not just in Egypt. Third, maybe now I will address your question, and I will try maybe to reply in 3 or 4 points. The first point would be about the growing need in Africa. Second would be about crisis/opportunity, and the third would be about financing. So for the first point, Africa, as you know, is 1.4 billion people, and between here and 2050, there will be another billion added, the majority of whom are young people. So that's a huge number. With growing needs, as I said, because they are young, so they still have the future ahead of them. Also, Africa is the fastest urbanizing continent or region, meaning that when you go to urban areas, you have different ways and needs, especially when it comes to energy, since we are on the energy day, whether it's heating, cooling, transport, building, whatever you do, industrializing, of course, you need more energy. So that is a huge challenge for the continent. It happens in a continent that is endowed with all sources of energy possible, even thinkable. Geothermal in the whole of Eastern Africa, solar, wind, hydro, and for batteries, we have the cobalt, the lithium for the transmission, copper, you name it. Having said that, there are good stories and less good stories. In the media, you always read the bad stories and the bad headlines about Africa. That's highly unfair, and I request you to always check and verify yourselves, because the news are always misleading when it comes to Africa. Africa, we have 22 countries whose main source of energy is renewable. In Africa, we have countries that use renewables for about 95% of their needs. A country like Kenya has a fantastic source of energy, geothermal, coupled with wind, the largest wind farm in Africa. We have 2 countries, one that is dependent on fossil fuel that turned massively into renewable, like Morocco, and we have one that produces fossil fuel, like Egypt, that are also moved into renewable. So we do have to mention the good stories. We cannot just keep the bad headlines looming about Africa forever. Be aware tell the good stories and the success stories of our continent. This is the first point. The second point, that crisis and opportunity. Despite these huge resources, we have still 600 million Africans, or close to 600 million Africans, who lack access to electricity. What does it mean? It means that they don't even have a bulb, electrical bulb. We have close to 1 billion Africans, 900 million, who still rely on charcoal, firewood, kerosene for cooking, causing deaths, causing burns, fumes, what have you, by hundreds of thousands every year. In a continent, as I said, where there are all sources of energy available. We cannot have universal access without finance. But I will come to finance later. This crisis of energy poverty in the continent has been compounded by the COVID. With COVID, we've seen for the first time access to electricity in the continent declining. We lost 30% of investments that used to go into electrification energy projects. And the current crisis, geopolitical crisis in Europe, has massive implications on our continent, economic, food, energy security, cost of everything, transport prices, you name it. This is affecting also the projects for infrastructure in general and energy in particular. We have estimated our needs for energy access, universal energy access, of about $130 billion every year. The financial gap is about 90 billion every year. This is a huge amount of money that cannot be secured only by public funds or national funds, or even IFIs and MDBs. And that is why, at this COP, you've heard it several times, but even before, and it will continue after, there is need all hands on deck. So financial systems, private sector, institutional investors, African, non-African, we all have to work together in order to ensure that access to electricity in Africa and to clean energy in Africa has been achieved. And why I'm saying this, because when we access the clean energy means that we stop cutting the wood to get the firewood. Just a small example. We stop using the kerosene and the fumes in order and get a cleaner source of energy. Even natural gas, which is the cleanest of fossil fuel, is essential in this equation in order to ensure a solid system, a reliable system, and also from practical, realistic reasons, it's very much part of our energy mix in the short and medium terms. Third point, there is no net zero without zero finance. I think this is clear. What role for the African Union? What role for the financial system? All what you said, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're working on harmonizing the policies and regulations on the continent to create one single African energy market. From here to 2040, the whole of the continent, whether it's generation, transmission, will have one single energy market where energy is generated, transmitted, traded, and exported from this largest market in the world. And we started that already last year. Also in this COP, we joined the African Development Bank, Africa 50, and many institutional investors. Maybe you've read it in the news or you read it in the news. We launched the African Green Infrastructure Alliance because we want to make sure to prepare the projects that are palatable for the private sector. I'm not going to say bankable because I don't like it. That are palatable for the private sector to make them reach a financial closure and for takeoff and to raise $10 billion. That was launched last week. This is in addition to a large number of regional transcontinental projects either for generation of electricity, renewable energy, or transmission, smart grids, mini grids, what have you, across the continent. So we're working from the micro all the way to the macro within Africa, but also with our partners across the globe. Um, the task is huge, but it's not impossible. We are very, very much optimistic about Africa. This is the largest market in the world. It's not just about the needs. When we say need, the other flip of the coin is an opportunity. It's the market. There is no other place on this earth that has the opportunities that exist on the continent, from its youth population, the abundance of resources, the huge market, especially with the African Free Trade Area, and the energy that is now being produced and in Africa, whether it's green hydrogen, whether it's SAF, the sustainable aviation fuel, whether even the natural gas that is being massively now discovered across the continent, there is no other opportunity that matches the opportunity that is in Africa. Now, what is what you always read? The risk and the risk. It's a myth. Check your data. Check the figures. Risk about Africa is a myth. It's not substantiated by data. And it's a fabrication and it's an engineering of risk. And I tell you that a country like Greece and a country like Portugal, Greece, debt to GDP ratio, 200 something, Portugal, debt to GDP ratio 100 something, Ghana, debt to GDP ratio 80 something, yet they rated credit rating firms, they rated Ghana very several notches below Greece and Portugal, resulting in what? Ghana would have to borrow at more than 9%, whereas Greece borrows at 1 or 2%. This is not, this has to change. So I'm calling on the financial sector, starting from the Egyptian financial sector, scrap this idea of Africa is risky. Africa is the opportunity. And if you're not in Africa, you are not in business. And I thank you.
Thank you very much, Farida. Dr. Amani, the one thing I would be really sorry about is that you have to leave us. Just before you leave, Ya Fandom, بعد إذنك, just everyone, this is an African woman, this is an African cop, this is really your passion, and this is what we need. This is what we need, people to face people and to tell them what you just told us. Thank you. Maybe before you leave, Ya Fandom, can we, because we want you on the photo, so sorry.
I'm sorry, but I have the
to come in the future conferences. Thank you very. Don't worry. Okay. I'll move to Dr. Hanan Morsi, and if you allow me, I'll try to take from one very important thing that Her Excellency mentioned and that Dr. Amani alluded to. Is impactful more bankable? Because we always say, okay, it's renewable, it's sustainable. Well, how about the social component of ESG, the social, the impact? How can we convince banks that when I deliver a project that has an impact, it has to be more bankable and easier to get money for? We're always saying risk, and I'm sorry, I'm not a banker, but banks will talk to us about risk. There is no mitigation, there is no development without taking risk. How can we work on this, advancing the concept of impactful is good for bankability?
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here with you today. I think I'll start with that. I think we need, perhaps before we go to that specific point, to just put in context the challenge that is facing Africa. Africa has a population that represents 17% of world population, yet it contributes less than 4% of global emissions. And it suffers the most in terms of the consequences. It has 9 out of the 10 most vulnerable countries in the world to climate change, and it's estimated that there are needs for $3 trillion to finance adaptation and mitigation by 2030, in line of the financing requirement for NDCs. So the financing needs are huge. At the same time, in terms of flows to the continent receives less than 3% of global private sector finance flowing to us. And the private sector finance, in terms of total finance, represent only 14%, compared to other regions where Asia, for example, it's about 50%, US is 96%. So what we see from that picture is that the needs and financing requirements are huge, yet the role of the private sector is really limited relative to elsewhere and other regions. And that leads us to the next issue, that to actually move the needle and do better in mitigating and adaptation to climate change, we need to crowd in more the private sector in that picture. Same issue also even in terms of market access. Africa has less than 1% of the green bonds on global markets. So there is a lot from the financing side that needs to be done. And at the same time, we've heard from Dr. Amani earlier mentioning this energy paradox, the fact that you have 600 million people out of 800 globally that don't have access to electricity. You have 800 million that don't have access to clean cooking energy. And here is also another opportunity, because it's an opportunity to do that with a balanced mix, to use renewable and the potential in renewable in the continent. We have 40% of the global solar potential, 40% of what exists globally. And currently we also have the largest green hydrogen plant under development in the continent. So all these can be used to actually meet these energy needs in a greener, more sustainable ways. You asked a very important question, which is how do we actually, both in terms of the bankability, but also in terms of sustainability becoming attractive. And I think there are a number of issues. For example, of course, we need to enhance the bankability of the projects that exist. And for example, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, we held round tables and regional forums to look at green projects in preparation for COP. And we looked at 200 projects across the continent. We linked also with potential creditors and financing agencies, and we had this dialogue not only to identify those that already there is interest to finance, but also to give feedback for those that were not deemed as ready to be financed, so that they can actually go back, improve the design, the structure, and have better potential. So increasing the bankability is key. But also, I think there are, to crowd in the private sector, there are essential things that we need. We need more de-risking. We need, issues like, partial guarantees, like credit enhancement instruments, more equity. And here, it's really critical, the role of the banks and MDBs, and particularly MDBs, because to do that in a sustainable way, okay, you actually need their support with these design issues and these instruments. And that's why we have been actually advocating in the area of global financial architecture reforms, that we need to have the MDBs better capitalized. We're also advocating for the special drawing rights of the IMF to be rechanneled through MDBs to actually allow them to do more of that, because then you get the leverage, you get the multiplier effect. And finally, to also encourage MDBs to take more risk on their balance sheets so that they can do more of these activities. Thanks.
Thank you very much, and I really like your elaborative. Thank you very much, Dr. Hanan. And you spoke about MDBs, so you allow me, I'll move to the MDBs or that we have on the panel. Casil, if you will allow me, I'll save you as the best for last, because Harry Boyd Carperton has an empêchement. He needs to leave us, I guess, not too far. So Harry Boyd, how can we make more use of you, if I may put it as bluntly as this? How can we, I mean, we've done our job. We're announcing so many projects. We're going green hydrogen, renewables. The African people are telling you, you need to support us more. What areas of support can you help us more on development of projects, orchestrations, bankability, safety, safeguards, and so on? What can we get more of EBRD?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Well, I brought my bag of money, but unfortunately I left it in the hotel. But let me first thank NBE for the invitation and indeed for the partnership. NBE is a really important partner for EBRD. We've done 2 loans together. I hope we'll do more, but we're also working very closely together. And I'd really like to commend you on the efforts to transform your own bank and to transform the way that your bank thinks about climate risk and so on. It's always best to set a good example by leading, and that's exactly what you're doing. You're such a good partner that I'm almost ready to forgive you for taking one of our best ever bankers, Shahir Zaki. When I say almost, it is almost. I'm afraid we haven't yet forgiven you. Let me pick briefly on 2 points that Her Excellency Dr. Fouad made. One is the importance of a statement last week by Egypt on Friday, bringing forward the renewable energy target for Egypt from 2035 to 2030. That sounds quite technical. It is not. Please do not underestimate it. It is absolutely seismic for this country, for this continent, and for climate finance. Because what that means is in numbers, 30 gigawatts of new renewables between now and 2030. That is a huge investment need. And that is going to turn this country into what it should be, which is a green energy superpower. So please don't let that detail get lost and be thought of as, oh, a sort of a moving number here or whatever. It's a small number change with enormous significance. And I think the Egyptian government has been incredibly courageous and far-sighted in going for it. The second point I want to pick up on is Dr. Fouad talking about adaptation. The reality is that the conversation going on right now in COP is whether or not we can keep 1.5 degrees alive. What does that mean? It means that we are going to 1.5, and we already feel the impacts now at 1.1. So we have to accept that a huge adaptation challenge lies ahead of us. And it's really important that all of us, financiers, businesses, policymakers, citizens, internalize that and understand that however successful we are with mitigation, we are going to 1.5, and that will have very significant impacts, and we have to adapt to them. And indeed, the developed world has to really step up its support for the developing world, and that includes MDBs. So all of this is me successfully avoiding the question. But you're not going to let me get away with that. What can we offer more? MDBs bring 2 things to the table. We bring money and we bring advice. And we try to bring them together because we think that the combination is more powerful than the elements in isolation. And we need to do more finance, because we heard from Hanan, my former colleague, and another great loss to EBRD, but at least I can't blame NBE for that. But we heard from Hanan, we heard from the Commissioner Ayman that the investment need in Africa is huge. So we need more. NDBs need to deliver more money, and many of you will have seen the high-level expert group from Nick Stern and Vera Sangwe recommending a tripling of NDB finance. But we need to bring that with more advice, because if we just put more money on the table, we're pushing on string. We're pouring water on sand, because it's no good just putting more and more money, making more and more money available. What we need is the right environment. So I think, what can MDBs do more? We can finance more and we can provide more advice. But what we really need is a partnership with government, with civil society, and with business to look at, understand what do you need to do more, to create the demand for more finance, to create more investable opportunities. And that I think is really for business and for private sector to come and say, I want to invest in adaptation. I want to invest in resilience. I want to invest in mitigation. But to do that, I need this. Maybe it's, I need a removal of subsidies. Maybe I need a new permitting regulation. Maybe I need a different approach to land ownership rules. But it needs to be a dialogue amongst all of the parties which identifies what is needed on the policy framework. And then, yes, MDBs can step into that gap. We can provide the advice, we can provide the money. But we can't do it alone. At the end of the day, we are servants to our countries of operation, and we need to be guided, and we need to work in partnership.
Thank you very much, Boyd. It always makes a moderator like me feel very pleased when an international expert like you recognizes an important announcement by his Egyptian government for the 2030. It's really impactful coming from you. Casilda, I'll have a follow-up question from what I asked Harry Boyd. Now, you're French. I really like that, having lived in France before. You're Agence Française de Développement. That means you're very careful, you're very green, you're gender-oriented, but you're also very African. So how can we tie all of these connections into what more can we get out of you? And I really like the piece of advice. I mean, I think a lot of projects need advice. I mean, they need how to make it bankable, how to project elaboration, project orchestration. How can multilaterals like you help us work on policies that will protect patent, that will give us easier access as entrepreneurs to facilities and so on, other than just, as Harry Boyd said, just giving money. I mean, the role behind giving money.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here with you on this panel. And 7 years ago, French Development Agency, COP21, took the ambition to have 100% of its financing aligned with Paris Agreement. Since then, we have doubled our climate finance, so that's 6 billion euros in 2021. One third is also favorable to biodiversity and 50% to gender. So we're here to share this experience because we believe that national and public development bank like NBE have a key role to play in aligning finance to Paris Agreement and to SDGs in general, because they represent 12% of total investment worldwide, public and private, so that's a big part. And because they have the capacity, like us and like you said, to invest both in grants, loans, and to meet demand, because they can provide financing, but also advice, as you say. And they have a specific capacity to provide capacity building, governance, and policy dialogues, because they are national banks, and we see you have a very strange dialogue with with the Egyptian government, and that's a testimony of that. So IFD is focusing on mobilizing public bank development partner and share experience within IDFC club, but also through the Financing Common Summit, or directly with partners in the country, like we do with you. One illustration on climate finance, climate finance by public bank aligned with Paris Agreement is TFSA. The minister talked about it. It's transforming financial system for climate. It is a global program co-financed by AFD and Green Climate Funds that aims at mainstreaming climate finance through national banks. We are proud that the first signature was here in Egypt with the National Bank of Egypt in 2020 for an amount of 100 million euros, both technical assistance and loan. And we deeply thank the Minister, Her Excellency Yasmin Fouad, who personally committed, and she talked about it, to the program vision and their support in making this project reality in Egypt. The partnership with NBE Group has then grown between AFD and NBE Group. and a new project, Finance in Common, that aim contribution to scale up sustainable finance transition in Egypt has shown. The signature took place last week with the three bank, NBE, Bank Misr, and Bank du Caire, and with our CEO, Rémi Rioux, last week. And so this is an opportunity to thank Mr. Okasha and his team because it's a concrete example of leveraging this relationship with the National Public Bank and to reallocate finance aligned with SDG, including climate. You asked me, for example, of concrete technology and progress we can promote and giving advice. First, I want to highlight that non-technology measures are powerful, driven, and regulatory for climate action, and this includes regulatory measures, such as promotion of responsible consumption. And this is an example, is the recent commitment of the EU member states to reduce their energy consumption this winter up to 20%. I've heard Egypt did something similar with the temperature in the mall. And so this is an investment-free measure. So that's the first advice we can give is to optimize the investment, have those regulatory measures. But coming to technology, we also recommend the promotion of smart grid because smart grid is a very good way to twin demand and production, and this is also a way to optimize investment and to make it more bankable. In AFD, we have also promoted floating solar. I don't know if you do that in Egypt, but that's also a good technology to optimize land use, and that's one of the big problem of renewable energy like solar or wind. And also, I was on a panel yesterday. We talked about adaptation and water, and actually, there are a lot of investments that are still great infrastructure, and we really promote nature-based solution because for flood management, for watershed protection, they really contribute both to climate and biodiversity, and that's really interesting for us. And at the end, of course, I think it was this morning, AFD with Egypt, we are supporting the green hydrogen strategy and research, and so that's also something we will be very happy to support Egyptian government in its research. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kasil. It's very rich again, and it's extremely impressive. I understand Haribod has to leave us. Thank you very much, and for being with us. I would like to thank the team of the National Bank of Egypt for the next phase, because I think it is corporately just and ethical and correct not to have had this session without recognizing the man that was starting to work on renewables when everybody was saying it's not doable. More than 2 decades ago, Dr. Subki, who is the former head of the New and Renewable Energy Authority. Unfortunately, we miss him. He cannot be physically with us, but we have a short video to play on his behalf. I mean, for us, he's the godfather of renewable energies in Egypt.
Reflect that an entity is providing electricity from sustainable sources, wind, solar, or any additional sustainable sources, and providing that to end users who do have some issues regarding the carbon the carbon dioxide production. So this is looked at as one of the easiest ways to meet the climate change reduction targets, and it will help in reducing definitely the carbon dioxide content around the globe. In Egypt, actually, over the last 3 days, a number of MOUs were signed. These were to facilitate sustainable energy to end users in the telecom section. The telecom entities will be provided with sustainable energy, electricity from sustainable energy through this independent power producers scheme. This is important because it will help also transfer the market, the Egyptian electricity market, from a single buyer model to this competitive market. This will eventually evolve in a fair competition, will improve the quality of the service of the electricity provided.
الصوت مش طالع. سوري معلش. Okay. Okay, I think we have a technical unfortunate glitch with the video from Dr. Subki. I think we did have a live stream, and for anyone who is interested, of course, we can get in contact with the team of the National Bank of Egypt, and we can share the video with anyone who is interested, and we deeply apologize for that. In an attempt to try to bring this session to some concluding remarks, Mr. Okasha, if you allow me, no one from your team has advised me to do this, but I want to stretch you to a different level from the discussion, if you allow me. So we've been talking about the National Bank of Egypt role in financing and supporting climate change related projects. So far, the talk, I have a feeling it was going on the mega infrastructure matters, renewables, big projects, and so on. But I do not want to forget that we have announced at Egyptian in this COP27 one important initiatives and two very important slogans that I really tie them in my head with National Bank of Egypt. The first one is the National Smart and Green Initiatives of the Dr. Mahmoud Muhiddin, UN Special Envoy for Climate Change. And he was talking about financing smaller projects driven by entrepreneurs coming from localities, from municipalities, and so on. And we understand that they want to blow this 10 times more, 6,000 projects, moving them to 60,000 projects. And I know that the National Bank of Egypt is, again, Bank Ahl Masr, the bank of Egyptian people. And the second slogan I'd like to, other than we are here for implementation, we said COP is coming to town. So how are we going to take your financing to town, to the villages, to the municipalities, the presence, the footprint? How are we going to go and grab the opportunities? I worked with Dr. Mahmoud Muhiddin on that initiative, and we were all extremely surprised. Ihab Shalabi from the Carbon is in the room. He can attest to that. He was extremely surprised, but the quality of the projects that came and were proposed to these initiatives from different governors, from young men and women, was amazing. So how can we amplify the role of National Bank of Egypt in financing smaller projects?
Firstly, I'd like to apologize to Dr. Muhammad Subhi about this technical issue. We're bankers, so we mediate money. Technology, that's not our airwave. And I'd like to thank him for being part of the panel, and I assure the online support will have the entire recording that we had with him. Going back to your question, which is, as you said, National Bank of Egypt, part of sustainability is to have financial inclusion. So when you look at National Bank of Egypt and our role in SME lending, for example, we have a portfolio reaching around 140 billion Egyptian pounds, and That's across more than 100,000 borrowers on the SME level. That's a huge portfolio when you're looking at it. And that's one of the means of educating the smaller businesses and medium businesses. When you look at those projects, we're program-based. So we have this initiative that we have, which is called the Ahli Business. And within that initiative, we have several programs catered to different segments of the economy. So when you look at solar, as I mentioned at the beginning, solar irrigation, we're changing the traditional irrigation systems to solar-based modern irrigation, saving water, saving energy, reaching the farmers. We're looking at logistics to gather milk from dairy farms to transport them into the dairy production field. That's on the SME level. Also, when we're looking at consumer lending and micro lending, they're financing for retail side, for electrical solar paneling of houses, things like that. That's also within the range of products that we have. So as you said clearly, addressing the smaller projects is the main driver. When you look at an economy with 70% of GDP and 70% of employment within the SME lending arena, then if we don't concentrate on those and only concentrate on bigger projects, that's a challenge. But I'd still like to concentrate on bigger projects because they have the feeding industry going into them is always the smaller industries. One of the projects that we're very proud of having financed and participated in its equity is the Canal Sugar project, which is an agricultural industrial in Upper Egypt. So as we said in the banks, all the right boxes. You're talking about agriculture of 180,000 fadans. You're talking about producing sugar and reducing the import-export, the trade gap, because that's import substitution, saving the foreign currency. At the same time, you're looking at a positive social impact project. You're employing all the people within the area in Upper Egypt, and you have the feeding industries, the smaller farms that we're catering for with microfinance for them, so that they as well can be feeding industries of the beet to the sugar beet to the sugar factory. So when you look at that, you're looking at thinking it's an entire chain. You can't look at, I want to do a project that will save energy. No, you have to see the social impact and the environmental impact of any single project when you're studying. It goes as far as when you're import substituting, you're actually reducing the emissions of the cargo shipments crossing within the international waters. Even that you're saving on. So, as you said, definitely, National Bank of Egypt, along with all other banks under the auspices of the Central Bank of Egypt and its directives, we're working very closely on shifting the mindset of investors and of bankers to be more green, as you may say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wakasha. Before trying to give the chance for many final concluding remarks, I want to try to democratize the panel, and I have a gentleman up there and another sir. So I'll start with the first one who raised his hand. Some people want to contribute with questions. I'm not sure if we have a mic in the room, please. Please go ahead. كاميرا بعد إذن حضرتك ممكن ترجع
مش عارف
شوية.
صوتي واضح ولا
تمام اتفضل.
Okay. The session, thank you. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Suleiman, and I am a board member at the National Council for Women, and I chair the Environment Committee and the Economic Committee. And I actually have a very small recommendation for the banking sector. When I'm not doing National Council for Women, I'm building software for the banking industry for the last 2 decades. And I have a very small comment for all the bankers. I see many bankers from different banks. I would very much recommend that the tendering process that's being done at all the banking today to be turned to digital. We are having a lot of problems in actually presenting so much documents and printing so much paper. Last week, I participated in one of these tenders. I personally, as a company, presented about 2,300 pages of print, and I'm only one vendor out of 5. So that's 10,000 pages that have been printed last week just for this submission. So imagine how many trees actually this is costing us. And now we're talking about hydrogen, carbon, and let's start, please, with the very small issues that we can actually change tomorrow. So thank you very much for this. I hope this works well for all of you. Thank
I
you.
really thank you for a very intelligent recommendation, and I think Dr. Starakesha wants to respond to that.
Actually, we hadn't thought about that. We were working mainly on the auction system, because the same thing with auctions, people present the papers, people go in with auctions, so that's being digitized. Tendering process definitely is a very good point, and we need to work on it. Thank you.
Thank you very
Regarding
much.
paper internally in banks, a lot of systems are good. We can't. Paper office is a dream. I don't think it's attainable tomorrow morning. As I said, it's a learning curve for all industries. I'll tell you an example. We all have those applications that we pay our electricity bills. Utility bill is a very important reference for residency. Yet when you pay digitally, and I faced that with my son once, when you pay digitally, you don't have a paper receipt. If you go anywhere and they tell you, show me a proof of residency, and tell them, I paid my electricity bill the last 6 months electronically, they tell you, sorry, we need a paper. So it's the entire chain. It's a learning curve, it's a development curve, it's a change of culture, all that we have to work on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kesha. I have two more questions in the room. I will start with the gentleman for simply because he's more responsible and putting them on a mask. So.
Thank you. I'm no longer putting. My name is Ala, and I don't think I have a good mic, but anyway. I'm an environmental economist. I'm attached to the of environment.
If you can move closer, then the disruption from the connectivity with the system will be clearer. Sorry for this.
No worries.
تفضل يا فندم.
Okay. I just want to remind Mr. Akasha about the project that we had from the World Bank side. I was privileged to be the task team leader, Environmental Pollution Abatement Project 2, and Phil Jago is here and he can attest to that. It was an amazing project, $194 million, and National Bank of Egypt was our financial intermediary. We had development partners, AFD, we had EIB, we had JICA. It did amazing things with industry, and actually the byproduct was carbon abatement as well, which was not the intention, was not the one of the KPIs, but it turned out in the end to be perfect. Now I just want to do some reuse and recycling very quickly of what all the distinguished panelists said. So we have Africa, we have like less than 3%, 54 countries, half of the most vulnerable countries in the world are going to be from Africa, devastating effects. Now, I think what the panelists have said, especially Dr. Morsi, was we need to think outside of the box. We need to come up with some innovative ideas. We need to think more about how we could come up with a package. It's not one or the other. It's all about like thinking in parallel. One of them is debt relief. Secondly is de-risking, and that's where the financial sector responsible banking comes in, and responsible investment is by how could MDBs with banking sectors, national banking sectors, and countries can de-risk all the climate change operations to be able to get more than 16% of the contribution of the private sector. One of the things that I think should be done for de-risking is some debt relief. How you need to link debt relief with de-risking and insurance guarantees. That's, I think, one of the great things. And also, we were talking about emissions trading schemes like the credits a la clean development mechanism. And I think that's going to be a big boost for private sector in Africa if they are able to engage in this with the North, so that they could come up with CERs, certified emission reduction vouchers, and they go back and they sell it in a carbon market. I think that would be great. But I think we need to all of the above. I don't think we should be focused on one thing. I think we should be focused on everything at the same time. I think that's my 2 cents. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to, on behalf of the panel, I'd like to thank you for enriching our discussion. I'd like the final remark before concluding the session from حضرتك. اتفضل يا فندم. You can come to the front because of the connectivity disruption, please. We do have, if you allow me, we do have 5 more minutes, and I still need to conclude the panel because then the room there are other people.
It's just a question, not a
Please,
remark.
اتفضل يا فندم.
Thank you very much for yes. I've seen MBE has been leading in the green finance, and I've seen different modalities. We have seen MBE following a credit facility specialized for climate, one with the AFD. We have seen specialized credit programs such as the solar irrigation. And I want to pick your brains on the future. Do you see more of this on-shelf tailored products for certain green technologies, special funds, or do you see more mainstreaming within the regular lending operations? I have no idea how the future will evolve, but would like to listen to you.
As I mentioned at the beginning, banks are adaptable. We have come across ages and ages. We adapted our lending models. We've adapted our stress testing models. Previously, some items were not within our stress testing, like a mass pandemic. We never included it in our stress testing. Now it's part of the stress testing. Now we're looking at climate finance. Now we're looking at climate risk. That is also being built into our stress testing models. So where we're going now, definitely, there are going to be more environmentally tailored kind of products and lending models, because this is what the world needs. Banks are just financial intermediaries. So we have the money and we lend. If the world needs to develop in industry, if the world needs to develop in agriculture, if the world needs to have those projects that are being invested in to be driven towards less environmental and social impact, that's our role, and that's what we learn with time. So definitely there's to be more to come. I mean, even when you're talking about the paper and turning digital, we have to consider something else. When we turn digital, that requires higher energy consumption for the servers, for the processing power, for the chips that are used within the computers, for the computer screens, for the batteries. All this is also not very environmental. So I'm not saying that we cut down trees and use paper, but I'm saying even when we're looking at transforming to digital, we have to think, what are we going to do so that this transformation digital and the hardware used for the digital environment are not also climate polluting? I have to get the different metals, minerals, it's also polluting and it's disturbing the ecosystem. So definitely we're adaptable and we're learning as much as the world is learning. We're also citizens of the world, not just bankers. We're not that bad.
Thank you very much, Mr. Okasha. And before concluding and thanking everyone, I'd like to tell you that I was very lucky because this COP is also about gender, and the circumstances has let me outnumber you by 2 wonderful ladies sitting on the panel versus you towards the end.
You started off by balanced.
It was balanced, but I mean, everyone. I mean, we should empower gender in this COP. So I'm really happy that we're concluding with 2 ladies versus 1 gentleman on the panel. I'd like to conclude by thanking everyone, Kasil, Dr. Hanan, Mr. Okasha. I really enjoyed being with you, moderating. I hope the discussion was rich and entertaining for everyone in the room. Once again, I'd like to thank National Bank of Egypt, Bank Ahl Masr, and thank you very much.